For me, I didn't really realize until probably halfway through college that I didn't really want to live the life of, nights and weekends. While that was great in that stage of life, it wasn't what I wanted forever. So I was able to create something in my career a little more creative to stay in the music world.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here. And check out our site at contrabassconversations.com for everything that's been happening over the past decade. And I'd love to hear from you. I love hearing people's stories. Send me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a guest idea for the show. That would be great. And I know you're going to dig today's episode with Clair Condit. And Clair is the founder of The Marketed Musician, which is a service for musicians who are looking to up their impact, up their income, represent themselves better online. And I became acquainted with Clair through the Audition Breakthrough Summit, which happened earlier in 2017. And she and I were both presenters along with Ira Gold and several others. It was a great event. It'll happen next year. I'll let you know when that occurs. So Clair and I started chatting, and I realized quickly she'd be a great guest for the podcast. I love talking with people outside of the bass world, but they have something to bring to our community, which is totally Clair. So Clair has worked in marketing for the National Repertory Orchestra, NRO in Colorado, and the Houston Symphony, and she now works in the corporate world. We talk about her background, the path from music performance, she was an oboe major at Indiana University, into her current career. She also hosts the Marketed Musician podcast, which is now in its second season and features Clair along with co-host Allie Tyler. They're short episodes, they're around 10 to 15 minutes. They cover topics like mistakes musicians make writing their bio, overcoming resistance, getting media coverage, putting together a press kit, breaking down fears around marketing, and all those things that are so important for 21st century musicians. I really enjoyed chatting with Clair, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. I'd also like to thank D'Addario Strings and let you know about our new giveaway for Kaplan strings, 10 sets of Kaplan strings. If you go to contrabassconversations.com/strings, you'll get entered in this giveaway. And Nick Scales, bass professor at West Texas A&M, he's been using Kaplans. Here's what he writes. He says he tried some heavy gauge Kaplans on his orchestra bass. He writes, they are fantastic. They are really not that much thicker than the mediums, but a good bit more tension. My French bass sounds great, warm, responsive, and powerful. And in the spirit of Spinal Tap, it goes to 11 now. I'm sold. That's a great quote. Nick's a great guy, and Kaplans are great strings. They're made in New York, like all D'Addario's strings. They're beautifully balanced. They've got superb bow response, rich tonal color palette. Enter our giveaway, and thanks again to D'Addario for sponsoring the podcast. And I'd also like to thank Rosin Saver for sponsoring as well. Rosin Saver is a revolutionary storage device that keeps bass rosin feeling as fresh as the day it was made. And I can tell you, I've put my pops in there about 4 or 5 months ago or something like that, and it is like it's new. It works. It keeps those natural waxes and solvents from evaporating, so your rosin stays fresh. And it's being used not just by me, but by members of the New York Philharmonic, Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, the Concertgebouw, Toronto Symphony, many others. So check them out at rosinsaver.com, and if you enter the promo code HEATH, HEATH, my name, you get 10% at checkout off of any and all orders. rosinsaver.com. Thanks again for sponsoring. Okay, here we go with our episode featuring Clair Condit. Yeah, maybe we could start there. How you got the idea for the Marketed Musician and the site and the podcast and the membership site. Just tell us that story.
Sure. So I'll back up a little bit in time to kind of give some context. But I play the oboe, and I always thought that, I wanted to be a professional orchestral musician. And, even in high school, I did Interlochen and Tanglewood and was very much involved in that world, and ended up going to Indiana University to study oboe performance. And I got there and realized that I was really missing some things that I was also passionate about with writing and marketing and communications. And IU has this awesome degree program called a BSOF, which has an outside field. So essentially you get to keep your performance degree, but then add on an outside field. So I added on an outside field in business with the focus on marketing. That's awesome, and really just kind of kept me involved in both worlds. And I didn't have to stay in school till I was 30. That was something I was really, careful about, because I didn't want to rack up all those student loans. So anyway, while I was at IU, that was when they started up the Project Jumpstart program, which is their entrepreneurship program. And they brought in Angela Beeching, who, wrote the Beyond Talent book, which is so good. And she started and built the entire career entrepreneurship program at NEC. So I got to work with her for a year, and that's really where this kind of passion got started. It really opened my eyes to the world of and the need for business and marketing help with musicians, because we spend all our time in the practice room and never really think about how we can connect with other people and really build a career out of this. It's much more than just playing and performing well. So that's kind of where that seed was planted, and then it kind of grew over the years. So after I graduated, I went and worked for the NRO for a summer and did marketing and PR there, and then moved back home to Texas and worked for the Houston Symphony for about, 2.5, 3 years, and mostly did media relations and marketing and communications with them, which was just super awesome. I got to drive around all the guest artists to their radio interviews, which was just, for me, it was like, oh my gosh, these are the rock stars of the classical music world. And, anybody on the street would be like, Hillary Hahn, what, who? But it was so cool just being able to, talk to them and work with all the journalists. It was a really awesome part of my career. But since then, I've kind of transitioned into the corporate world, which has given me a little bit more time on the nights and weekends. And I was able to, bring on more students and do a little more playing, and finally be able to launch The Marketed Musician, which is really kind of a culmination of like what I've learned in the marketing, communications, and business world, and being able to bring that to a lot of my friends who are classical musicians who are really struggling to launch their careers and get their name out there and build their private teaching studio and get more gigs. So it's been a real passion project, and it just launched in January, so it's still new and having a lot of fun with the podcast and our first few members of the studio. So.
Yeah, and it's great. I'm enjoying following with the podcast. It's great. It's like short, concise, really, really well done podcast. People listening, check it out for sure. I got a link in the show notes. And I'd love to maybe talk about what are some of the big struggles that you find musicians have when they get out there and they're trying to build their career. I mean, people don't know where the heck to start, right? I just got a degree. I want to perform, or I want to teach, or I want to do something. I don't know what to do. I don't want to. Who do I contact? Like, what do you see as some of the big challenges that people have?
That's an awesome question. And what kind of surprised me a little bit was, I was jumping straight to the tactical stuff, thinking that's where we need to get started. But having worked with some musicians, really those first few hurdles are more mindset. And, as musicians, and I've struggled with this too, we're such perfectionists. And we want to have everything together, all our ducks in a row before we, launch our website or do anything on social media or, actually put that marketing plan into action. So that's part of it, is just getting started and being okay with kind of going back to that I'm learning mindset and just testing and pivoting as you go, because that's really that's the creative side of business. And it's so much, it's so similar to being a musician, right? So if you're going to give a recital, you don't just pick up that piece and go perform it the next day. You work on it for months and months, and you start with the big picture, and then you get into the little details, and then your big picture is so much more informed and interesting at the end. And business and marketing is a lot like that too. There's a lot of creativity and experimentation. So just getting started is one of those first hurdles. And then the other is just realizing that marketing is not this, sleazy, slimy, scary thing. And it's really not about you, which is very freeing. Because when you look at marketing as like, this is how I'm able to serve others. And, whether you're a teacher looking to get more students or performing and winning more audiences at your performances, you're not doing that just for your own, to build yourself up. You're doing that because you really want to, help your students and provide a really interesting and enjoyable experience for your audiences. So looking at it through that lens, I feel has really just helped musicians that I've worked with kind of open their eyes to see some new possibilities with their marketing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's such a great mindset that you're talking about. The like, how can I help you, right? Like putting the focus on others, whether it's in your performing, whether it's in your teaching, whatever. And it's not sleazy, but it's something that musicians struggle with. And I've noticed so many times, like I love the concept of beta, right? Like getting something out there and it's not perfect and you work on it, but that's something that I think we struggle with so much as musicians because we're sitting in the practice room obsessively practicing X, Y, or Z, and we don't want to display it to anybody before it's perfect. And that seems to be a real hurdle that people have to get over.
Yeah. I mean, I even did it with a marketed musician, and I'm preaching to the choir here because I worked on that for a year. Wow. Like, it's crazy. I was building courses and, talking to musicians on the side, but I didn't actually launch it until a year later. So I need to take my own medicine on this one.
So where do people even start? I mean, there's so many things, like and everybody's going to have a slightly different path depending on what they want to do, but I start with a website? Do I start with social media? What are some recommendations you've given for people who are wanting to build, let's just say like a performing / teaching career? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think the first thing you need to do before getting to the tactical stuff is really just asking yourself, what do you want to create in your career? Mm-hmm. What does that big vision look like for you? What are your income streams? And then the next step beyond that is, who is your audience? Mm-hmm. Because what you end up doing with your marketing really ties into who your audience is. So if you are, a website is always a great place to start because when you're doing social media, you can point back to that and people can Google you and find you. But beyond that, really, it's, if you're wanting to attract young professionals, where are they hanging out online? Mm-hmm. Build your presence there. Or if you're wanting to find more students for your studio, where, you can look at where they're hanging out online, but then where are they hanging out in real life? Something that's helped me and then a lot of the members in the studio is just going to schools and giving master classes. So it's starting with those small things of just, how can I get, what do you want your vision to be? And then who are the people you're serving through that vision? Who are your audiences? Mm-hmm. And then finding ways to get in front of them, whether that's through social media or just where they're hanging out, either online or in person.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned like going to places where they are and in person. There's a podcast that I followed, the Solopreneur Hour with Michael O'Neill, and he talks about build your business like it's the 1980s. Even though we have all these tools, like there's nothing like actually trying to get out and get in front of people. I think we have such wizardry with the online tools we have now, and it's an amazing benefit, but there still is nothing like that in-person contact. Yeah. So and people should sign up for your email bio challenge, which I've gone through, which is really interesting. And I have a link in the show notes for this, but I've looked at a lot of musician bios and I've looked at my old bios, and some musician bios I look at, it's like everything that they've ever done from junior high till now in like some long chunky 12-sentence paragraph, or like every regional orchestra you've never heard of in your life that they've played with, or those kind of things. What are some mistakes, or maybe what are some ways that musicians could maybe better represent themselves online through their bio? And I know people should go through your course, but maybe just a couple of key takeaways.
Absolutely. So your bio, the reason I created the 5-day bio challenge is that it's your first impression so often. Whether people are coming to a concert, they're flipping through the program and they read your bio before they ever hear you on stage. And so that first impression is such a crucial one. And writing your bio really helps you kind of shape your brand messaging and really start thinking about your audience. So it's a really good process to go through, even if you already have a bio that's in pretty good shape, just to update it. But some of them, there's so many things we could talk about here. Having stuff from middle school and high school and, 10, 15 years ago, that's a big culprit. And then just having it go on forever. Bios there's a big difference between a bio and your resume or CV. So keeping that, really concise and discovering what your audience finds to be compelling, because so often we think like, oh, well, I won this big award. And, these things that to us stand out as big milestones in our career, but your audience might be more impressed that you performed with Yo-Yo Ma at a concert, or you performed at Carnegie Hall, or the little things that that we find to be not as exciting. Like when I was writing my bio, this was a while back, but I had a chance to perform with the San Antonio Symphony, and they did a 4th of July concert with fireworks in the background, which it's funny, that sounds more interesting to say, performed in front of fireworks with the symphony than, I performed Brahms too, which to me is more exciting. But that's just part of the process too, is, in the challenge we outline, we brainstorm all the different elements of your bio. And then once you think you find what's most compelling, the next step is to do a little bit of audience research and actually reach out to who your bio is going to be making that first impression with, whether it's students or audiences, and just picking their brain a little bit about what stands out to them. And it's often surprising.
I totally identify with that. I went through a bio crisis about a year ago, and I realized my bio was terrible. It was just like so many musicians' bios is in the third person, just Jason Heath has been the co-representative of blah blah blah. Who cares, right? And this and that. And I totally got rid of it, and I wrote it in the first person, which I know you don't necessarily have to do that, but I did that, and I like you said, performed in front of fireworks. I think one of the lines I put is I've conducted an orchestra in Cuba as a dog was eating a dead bird in front of us, which was true, right? But that's a much more interesting image than co-representative of blah, blah, so like, do you have any thoughts on first person, third person, that sort of thing? And maybe if we think about like it might be different if it's in print versus the web, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that question, because it is very different. And, your actual professional bio is not going to be, it's not going to have I's and we's in there. It's going to be from that more professional point of view. But when it comes to your website's about page, that's a totally different animal. And that's a mistake I see a lot of musicians make. I go to their website and go to about page, and it's just their bio, which wonderful that you have a bio that's so professional and well written, but writing for the web is so different than writing for a concert program or something of that more official nature. So when you're writing your about page, you can take those elements from your bio, but make them a little more personal and connect with your reader. That's when you can, identify with kind of the perspective that your reader is coming from. If you're a teacher, identify with your students and how you can help them, and then get into your story and how that connects with them right now.
I love that. A part of this whole the marketing musician membership site and everything that you're doing with it. I love that a podcast is like a key component of it. Why? And I love talking to podcasters about podcasting. I feel like I found a kindred spirit, with all the like tech minutia that I'm dealing with every week. Why a podcast? What attracted you to that as part of your plan?
So it's a couple of reasons here. Is when you start a business, you need to do some form of content marketing. And for me, that was either, blogs, videos, or podcasts. And I personally love listening to podcasts. I have about a, 30 to 45 minute commute 2 ways every day. And, I get a lot of listening done there and really just enjoyed that form of content. So it was kind of a personal reason in that regard. But then thinking about musicians, we're on the road all the time, whether you're, on the train to go to your next gig or in the car to go teach a student. I really wanted something that would just fit organically into the day-to-day life of musicians. So that was kind of the other piece of the puzzle too, was just, talking to my friends who are living that life and finding out what their lives look like. Because, with blogs are great. They're great for SEO. They're great, for your website, and you can build a blog around a podcast. But you have to have time to sit down and read. And then with video, you have to have time to sit in front of your computer to watch. And, musicians are just crazy busy people. And so I liked the concept of podcasts because you could just, put your earphones in and listen when you're in the car, at the gym, walking the dog, doing the dishes, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a personal connection, the podcasting connection. Video can be too, of course. It might even be more so, but in a lot of ways, but it requires your undivided attention, right? Like you were saying, being in front of the computer, and that you're describing like what I do with podcasts too, like walking around and working out and doing the dishes and this and that. So very cool. Tell us about the membership site. Tell us about you've got this great bio challenge. Tell us about what you're doing beyond that.
Totally. So the membership site is called the Marketed Musician Studio, and I really wanted to create a online community that resembled what we grew up with in school and in college with our studios as musicians. So where you have that peer-to-peer connection and you're all learning together with the same goal. So that was the intent behind it. But instead of a studio for your instrument or your voice type, it's really a studio more to grow your business. So there's training in there. We have everything broken down into 3 categories. So it's planning, creating, and promoting. And within that, planning, you have things like your branding and setting your vision and really just kind of building out your business plan of what you want to create. What are your streams of income? What are your prices? Who's your audience? And then when it gets to creating, that's where we focus on building your website. And it's all the visual elements of your brand because you've set up that kind of what that true north looks like for you and what you want to create. And then we bring about the visual manifestation of that. And then once that's set up, we dive into promoting. So that's where all the really, tactical fun stuff comes in with social media and all the in-person and online things you can do with your marketing. And that whole process has been really interesting because I almost think of it as building a house. When you're planning, you are designing your house. You're saying, how many rooms do I want to have? What's the flow? What materials do I want to use? And then you go to creating it, which is you're building it. You're putting up all the walls. You're starting to see it come into action. And then promoting is when you would invite people over for a party. And so often with our marketing, we just want to invite people over for a party and have a great time. But if you don't do the planning and creating first, then you could invite people over and have a party in a field and wonder why they didn't have a great time.
You've mentioned a couple of times multiple income streams, which is something I've thought a lot about. And I think that that's something that musicians have a really hard time kind of getting a grasp on, be outside of playing gigs and teaching lessons. And I know that I have several oboe player friends from Chicago that started selling reeds online. That's a great business. But could you maybe talk about for somebody who's starting out and just all they've been told in music school is get a job or maybe get some private get a playing job or get some private students on the side. What are some other income streams that musicians could be exploring?
Oh man, that's a good question. And it's so different for every person. I really encourage people to think about their strengths and what they enjoy doing. Almost if you can imagine like a Venn diagram, and in one circle you have what am I good at? What do I love doing? What are those strengths? And that's musical and non-musical. And then who would you like to work with is the other half of the Venn diagram. And then where it overlaps is where you can get really creative and connect the dots between what you enjoy doing and the people you'd like to work with. And, it's hard to give a cookie cutter answer here because there are so many different outcomes. But for example, I have a friend who is also a member of the studio, and he is a trumpet player, and he performs professionally in an orchestra and teaches on the side. And he loves, he loves teaching, obviously, and came up with some technique books and really just put what he was already teaching into a method book that he created, self-published, and is selling on his website, which is something that he was able to create on his own and is making side income from that. So there are so many different things. With oboists, we're all making reeds and selling them, and it's pretty cool. I don't actually have a ton of time to make reeds for my students right now, but my very first oboe teacher, Alyssa McKeithen, who's wonderful and has her Double Reed Girl website, I send my students to her, and that helps her business. So there are so many ways you can do this, and being online just helps you reach even more people.
Yeah, I love the way you describe that because it's so true. Like it's so specific to the individual. Like people ask me like, how do you make money outside of playing and teaching? And I tell them, but it's like, well, not everybody's going to like start a podcast and a blog for 10 years and sell ads on that and turn that into like books and this. I mean, that's not really like a logical thing to recommend, but it worked for me because of my background. Or if you're like a double reed player, like you're describing, that's a great option. Or creating a technique book. I mean, I just bought today a piece off of somebody's website, a bass player that I've started following through YouTube, and he has his pieces available for sale on his website. I was listening, like, this is awesome. I want to learn this. Click purchase, and there it is. So yeah, that's a great way that you put that. It's so specific for what people are up to or what they're interested in.
Yeah. And like your strengths, you're such a connector. You're out there in the bass community and you're connecting the dots for so many people, and it's just such a natural fit with the podcast and the audience that you're building. So that's something that only you can uniquely do. And when we all find our strengths, we come up with those creative solutions. Well, and it's like you're describing, it's that self-awareness or that self-analysis of your strengths and what you are. I mean, I think a lot of people, for me, a lot of it was, I never set out to do what I'm doing. I didn't even think of ways that I could monetize it until like years down the road. So starting with a little bit of intentionality, like you're describing, could probably save people a lot of years of floundering. Claire, this is so much fun. I don't ever have any scripted questions for these, but I do have one kind of question I like to ask people, and I'd love to hear your answer, especially since you were at Indiana and were you a performance major that first year, those first couple of years? I was actually a performance major the whole way through.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just added on the outside field in business. So I was the crazy person taking 19 hours every semester and through the summer so I could graduate. But no, it was good. It was oboe performance and business. Okay,
so if we go back in time to like freshman year for Claire at Indiana, and you could give her some advice, what advice might you give with what you know now?
Gosh, so if I could go back to my freshman year, when I started at IU, I was just a oboe performance major, and I thought I wanted to play an orchestra, but I didn't know what that looked like. And so the advice I would give to young musicians, who are just 18, getting started out of high school, deciding their major, going into college, is what do you want your life to look like when you're a grown up? When you're out of school, when you're married, maybe starting a family. Because for me, I didn't really realize until probably halfway through college that I didn't really want to live the life of, nights and weekends. Well, that was great in that stage of life. It wasn't what I wanted forever. So I was able to create something in my career, a little more creative to stay in the music world, but that also fit the lifestyle that I wanted to create for myself. So I know a lot of people that love that because then you have the freedom during the days to do things when, the rest of the world that's stuck in a 9-to-5 can't. But it's just, if you can go back and just try to ask yourself what success looks like to you, because in school, people will try to tell you what success looks like and fit you into that mold, but really just starting to create that vision of what you want your career to look like and taking actions to move you closer towards that.
Thank you for chatting, Claire. Folks, check out themarketedmusician.com for more info about what they're up to. Subscribe to the podcast. There's a link in the show notes. And in addition, you can check out The Marketed Musician, Claire and Allie, on Facebook Live every week. They're diving in, talking about a different topic. I was one of their recent guests just a few weeks back. So thrilled to be doing that. There's a link in the show notes. You can check that out and hear our conversation. We talk about marketing, email, all kinds of topics. It was a lot of fun. Subscribe to their podcast if you haven't. And hey, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't. If it's your first time checking it out, search Contrabass Conversations in whatever podcast player you use, or you can check out our app for Android, iOS, Kindle. That is at contrabassconversations.com/app. Thank you for listening. So great having you along in this journey with me, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.